Every founder's been told to go find a painful problem and solve it. Today's guest says that advice is quietly killing startups. The pain points tells you almost nothing about whether anyone will actually pay. What you should hunt for instead is something he calls pull. If you've ever had a prospect tell your idea is really interesting and then ghost you, this episode explains why. Rob, welcome to the podcast today. I really appreciate you joining us. And so for people that don't know you, maybe you just give us a little bit of an overview of kind of who you are and what you've been doing and how you got to this point.
Yeah, so let's see. I didn't expect to be here. I worked at McKinsey, then went to Harvard Business School and thought I was really, really smart. And so I was like, well, being a tech billionaire wouldn't be so bad. and so I, did all the things I was supposed to do, did all the customer discovery, raised some money, got design partners, saw the clear path to multi-billion-dollar business and proceeded to get punched in the face for a couple years when it didn't work. And
entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And I got a lot beaten out of me in a couple years, and then the startup took off. We went 0 to 4 million ARR in 2 years, kind of like mostly before the product was ready to support that. And when it didn't work, I didn't understand why it didn't work. Then when it did work, I didn't understand why it did work. I didn't understand why it changed. And I have been, unfortunately, obsessed with figuring that out. And so I've just spent the last, half decade or so working with a bunch of startups, digging into that piece of why does it actually work and how do you make it work? Especially how do you make one of these ones that grows really fast?
Is there any piece to pull from on your kind of consulting versus running product? Like, is there a big difference from that standpoint? I mean, obviously McKinsey, you come in, you do a bunch of analysis, you leave them with a plan, you walk away, versus doing something and getting punched in the face because you're the one that actually has to go do it. Is there any like was that a big transition for you, or just that kind of worked?
Well, I'd say nothing worked.
Well, eventually it did. You got to 4 million, so yeah, that's good.
So consulting is great. Like, it teaches you how to work really hard and how to think in a structured way.
Okay.
And what entrepreneurship teaches you, especially after you come from that background, is that there are way more ways to be logically correct than there are ways to be right in practice. And that was the hard part, which was I felt the need to understand things before doing them.
Okay.
And, I had to have kind of like a plan for the future. I had to, where does this get me to? How does this work? How should I be thinking about this? And that kind of prevented me from just hitting my head against the wall and seeing what sound that emitted and making decisions based off of that, which would have probably saved me 6 to 12 months of pain.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, everything is a learning, and so that review cycle gets a lot quicker in entrepreneurial circles. So that's good. But that's part of growing up, and that's how you remember what works and what doesn't.
Totally.
So, yeah.
I found like basically every entrepreneur I've met has gone through some
version
amount
of
especially us overeducated types, right?
Yeah.
Like. We go through an unlearning process that is a brutal thing. At the other end, we all kind of come to the same understanding of, okay, cool, customers have to want it, and the job is mostly selling, figuring out what they want to buy, and kind of like serving customers, and all the other stuff is kind of all accessories to it, and that's the core of it, and everything is downstream of like what are customers trying to do in their lives.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's start there. I think a lot of people get advice when they're thinking about doing a startup and they're getting to the go-to-market side of it. Really focus on the pain points. Basically, understand what that pain is. And I think a lot of your premise is pain points don't give you good indicators about actually people that are willing to purchase and change a process and buy something from you. And so maybe talk a little bit about your thesis around this and how kind of your pull methodology kind of came together.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that pain points, it sounds right to solve a hair on fire pain point and people will pay you. It just turns out that there are a lot of pain points that people have and they'll rate 9 or a 10 out of 10 on a scale. and then they won't buy. And so a lot of my friends have gone through this similar thing that I went through, which is you do a bunch of discovery interviews, you get them to tell you about their pain points, you ask which one is the most painful, you say, wow, 20 out of 25 people said this is a 9 or a 10 out of 10 pain point. And then then you go try to sell something and they don't buy. And what you realize is that life is a bunch of pain points and we mostly do nothing about them. The flip to that is that, even if somebody has a pain point, are they going to drop what they're prioritizing right now to do anything about that pain point? Most of the time, they're not going to say, you know what, that's a really good point. I'm going to drop all my priorities at this given moment to buy your product. Like, no, that's not a thing that happens. And so, pain points they are an interesting concept, but they are not predictive of a purchase.
So you think most of the industry has got this wrong? I mean, I'll even look at expense reporting, right? Somebody, the pain point that a lot of folks have is there's not transparency. It's a lot of cost. People get sued. There's a lot of problems around that. And basically, we kind of focused on that. And so I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm just trying to basically say, if I use my example of those were some of the things that, we would always go to people that were in the news because they just been sued. And so the pharmaceutical industry was terrible at this, right? They would spend a ton of money with doctors and they would and pad it in their expense reports. And so Dr. John Smith would be spelled 6 different ways. And there was all these rules about how much money you could spend with doctors. And so if you just change the name spelling of it, then it was a totally different doctor, which it really wasn't. But What happened was they ended up getting sued. And so we came in and said, hey, look, you got this problem. You don't want this exposure anymore. That was a pain point to them. And so we sold off of that in a number of areas. And so I'm just kind of curious, how would you think about that? Was there a different engine that was kind of involved in that basically really wasn't just the pain point?
I would imagine that somebody there, after they get sued, has a project on their to-do list, which is figure out how to not get sued, right? And so pain points may lead to projects and priorities on people's to-do lists, but pain points aren't action-shaped. There are many pain points. I bet you had a bunch of experiences where you'd go in and people would complain about their expense management system and then not buy. Yes. Because it's so easy to complain about how annoying your expense thing is. They will buy. It would be weird if they didn't buy. If somebody has been named the person who has to fix this so that we can never get sued for this reason again, and they've looked at the available options and said, okay, nothing else can help us do that, right? In that situation, that person's going to rip the product out of your hands.
Sure.
But anybody who's just kind of complaining about or has pains related probably won't buy.
So maybe reframe it then. So if it's not the pain points, how do you start to kind of frame the opportunity and really get signals from the prospect that this is something they want?
Yeah, so I don't talk about pain points. I talk about projects on their to-do list.
Okay. And so these are priorities, right? That's basically what you're saying.
Priorities, basically. In my mind, I just imagine that in everybody else's mind, we all have a Trello board.
Yep.
And on that Trello board, there's a million things on the backlog because, there's a bunch of things we'd like to do. But at any one point in time, there's one thing we're prioritizing. Maybe there's 2, maybe there's 3, but it's a short list of actual priorities. And so I focus on what are the projects on your to-do list that you're trying to do right now where your existing tools, methods, or options are not good enough. That's what I've created as the PULL framework.
Okay.
PULL is the acronym there. Project on to-do list. That's unavoidable is you. List of options you consider or use or try have limitations. They're not good enough to get the project done. When those 4 things are present, somebody will rip a product out of your hands. When those aren't present, you kind of have to convince them to buy. You have to twist their arm. You have to kind of poke and prod. And most of the time, they're not going to buy.
How does that scale from, I understand larger corporations where there's more infrastructure. How does that scale to, somebody who's, they started the business, maybe it's a family business. It's pretty small. It doesn't have that maturity of, I'm really thinking about this from a project perspective. I have a company that I do some work with in the property maintenance industry. And, there are a lot of small mom and pop places that own a handful of apartments or, single family dwellings. And selling them software can be really challenging because they're managing a bunch of different things and they have a bunch of problems, just like you said, but they're not really thinking about it very strategically.
Yeah. So I've found that trying to convince somebody who doesn't have pull, doesn't have to buy is really, really hard. But also that pull, right, like they don't need to have a detailed project management software where they're like, oh, this month's priority is X, right? And so an example of this that I can give you is a company called Jump Out, kind of near you. They're in Utah. Uh-huh. They sell to financial advisors. And financial advisors are often small, kind of like solo businesses. Yep. They're different scales, but they're not, many of them are just kind of like solo business owners. And so they don't have a ton of infrastructure either. But what they found is that these financial advisors are spending a bunch of their time in client meetings and have to manually enter notes into their CRM about those client meetings so that if regulators come knocking, they have an answer and won't get fined. And so they're always, they're always doing that, but they don't want to be doing that, but they don't have any good ways to not do that. And so Jump shows up and says, yeah, we offer an AI note taker specifically for financial advisors, and it helps you minimize the amount of time you spend taking notes. It's like, okay, cool. That on their mind, there was like this project on their to-do list whenever they were taking notes, which is spend the least amount of time on this. So that when Jump shows up, they rip the product out of their hands.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And I know this story actually from my own financial advisor, because he'd have somebody sit in and basically take notes and basically saying, this isn't a great use of time and money, or they'd record it and then they transcribe it. I mean, it was a pain. And and then you think about it from your standpoint going, oh, just use Zoom or something. No, you have to have something that's certified and meets all these requirements. I had no idea. And so it is way more complicated. And so it basically selects you to say, I have this problem. And like you said, it's something on their mind. And then there's the product that's there. And so that's a really good example. I appreciate that.
And I think for your case too, it's like what I tend to see founders will do is they'll go into a sales call with a small company and say, have you ever thought about blank software category, right? And like, do you have all these pains? You should want this software. Right, and it tends to fall flat because people may even like nod their head at the problems or pain points or whatever, and then they're like, "I don't understand this software. I don't understand." So, in a lot of what I've seen, when you focus on like, okay, the customers who have bought fast, what was really the project on their? What were they trying to do, and how do you redesign the sales pitch around that? The call goes a lot smoother.
I'm sure,
and you can kind of tell, in the first couple of minutes of a call, is this person actually trying to do something here, or are they not? Are they just kind of complaining?
So talk to me a little bit about like how you got there, right? You went from your own scenario where you basically were doing this and you had an inquiry of understanding how things worked. And like you said in the opening, some things you understood and sometimes you're kind of like, I still don't understand why that was successful. And so talk to me going from that point to like having this framework. What is the discovery process to get there?
So the big unlock came to me. I watched a random video online. I have no idea how I found it about product management of all things. Okay. And I watched that video right before we took off. And the basic premise of the video was by Ryan Singer from Basecamp. I don't know if you've did Shape Up. In the video, he was just explaining the difference between supply and demand as it relates to product feature requests, even where a feature request is actually a request for supply. It is not demand. Demand is this thing that exists out there in the world that is not wanting supply. It's not, I want a permissions feature in your product. It's, I want to make sure that people are not archiving projects in our to-do list in our project management software for everyone else. It's I'm trying to have something in my life. And so the split between demand and supply in my mind as like, oh, nobody actually wants my product. Nobody actually wants features. They want something independent and supply just fits. That was the first point when it like started to click in my brain that my job wasn't to convince them to want my product. Yep. My job was to understand demand. And so that's kind of what I started to understand that when our startup started taking off. I started to see that and started writing about it. And then I had a couple friends once our startup kind of like exited, who pulled me into their startups because they were both, two of my friends were both at like 10 to 20K ARR, wanting to get to 1 million ARR. And they were both in different industries and, well, just weren't sure. And so they had me come in, and I just like worked fractionally with them for the better part of a year, testing my theories and watching my what I thought worked not working, and then trying to make it work with them. And so I started sharing more about that, and more startups started pulling me in. And so I kind of tested this as solo or as founder, then kind of working very closely with a couple founders, and then kind of starting to write a bit more and more about it, and having other people test it, and then kind of getting involved in more and more startups over time to see where it worked and where it didn't work.
Well, that's good. I mean, you start to build kind of a library of I've got this theory, and then let's apply it. Is there a good example that you could walk me through that either was kind of the start, like here's how they were doing it before, we thought about the change, educate them, and then here's the outcome, to like make it concrete?
Yeah. So this company called Mook Test, they were probably the first one that I worked with after they were a friend who started about the same time that my startup had started. And when they reached out, they were trying to sell a QA automation tool into tech teams, into QA teams. And they were selling it for like $200 a month. And the sales cycles were like 6 months, which was not ideal.
No.
And the way they were selling it was kind of like the traditional way that I thought you were supposed to sell software, right? Where it's, hey, don't you have these problems? Don't you have these pain points? Here's our solution. Don't you want it? Let's do a demo. Let's do a trial. Let's do da-da-da-da. And so what happened is I just started watching their sales call recordings. And on one of the sales call recordings, the CTO was on the call. And the CTO was like angry during the sales. And at some point he said something along the lines of like, listen, I don't care. I just want QA to be automated. I wanted to get it off our plate. We've just had some big, some big bugs that like are really annoying. We need to solve QA. What are we talking about here? And what we realized there was that there's a certain kind of CTO who has just gone through something where QA is their number one priority. And and their priority is not like, I want to figure out QA automation. It's like, no, I want to get QA off of my plate.
Yeah.
And for that kind of person, selling a QA automation tool is totally counter to what they're trying to do. They don't want to think more about QA. They just want a kind of like forward deployed QA automation solution that they can plug in so they don't have to think about QA anymore. And that's what we realized that that's what was on this CTO's to-do list. We were like, wait a second, what if we tried to sell that? And so we did. And we tried to sell it, and it turns out they would not pay $200 a month for that because they were like, that's way too cheap. Yeah. And so we 10x the price, and then we doubled the price, and then we doubled the price again. And people bought it and were happy, and they'd buy it in like weeks instead of 6 months.
And so help me understand like the nuance of that. Like it was it a messaging and positioning standpoint? Like once you found the need, like what's there's a lot of other things that you kind of not glossed over, but like that happened in that process to get to them to basically start to double your per price per month type of thing. So maybe just walk me through some of those details.
So what I came to learn is that when you understand what that person's project on their to-do list is, everything about your business is downstream of that. Your positioning, we changed their positioning from QA automation tool to AI-powered forward-deployed QA as a service thing, right? Like something in that, right? I can't remember the exact specifics, but we changed it to that. And when we changed it to that, and when we understood what they were trying to do, our demo no longer made sense in the sales process. They didn't want to see us click around, or they didn't want to use a QA automation tool. So we cut the demo out entirely from the process. And then the pricing, again, pricing and packaging no longer made sense to them. And so kind of everything downstream of here's what they are trying to do, here's what this person is trying to do, had to change to fit what they were trying to do.
What I guess I didn't hear in there is, was there an exit or a success criteria that you kind of built that off of? Like once you found the to do, right? Like, and so sometimes this is hard, right? The CTO has got this idea, they're ranting and raving, but really, can you get it to the point where it's like, here's a definition of success. It does this today, and I need it to do that tomorrow. And then, like you said, it's a lot easier to do the downstream effects and help them get to that conclusion. And so in this case, did they have a very clear output of like what success looked like? Or in most of these, do they?
Yeah, I would say in that one, not super clear, right? Like what they wound up getting, what the MOOC test team wound up offering was something along the lines of like, you get a daily report of quality, and we build X amount of tests to cover 95% test coverage, and that like kind of worked. Yeah, kind of worked. Wasn't. I didn't feel like it was. Let me tell you a different example, which is in the jump case, right? When financial advisors just want to have their notes automated, basically note-taking automated, super clear what success looks like. I don't have to take notes in my format, they're in my CRM. Done, right? Like that one is just obvious. People in like, in an hour after their first client meeting with it are just like, okay, I'm never going back. This is done.
Yeah.
MOOC test case was a little bit more nuanced there, and they kind of had to go customer by customers. One of those AI native service agencies, which has a couple nuances to it. But yeah, like it totally ranges.
But do you think that's a requirement though to do this well? Is to like, if it's a job to be done, does there have to be some sort of exit criteria or success criteria around that project?
I don't know. I've seen ones in both directions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Have taken off. Ones where I wouldn't say there's like explicit exit criteria, and ones where they're very clear. Like here's when I know I'm good. Like there's some ones where it's just like, yeah, I feel better now that I have purchased this. Like a lot of insurance things are like, I feel like I'm covered. And so, it makes sense that would be there, but I haven't seen it as an explicit requirement.
Okay, that's good. How does this fit into like a larger kind of go-to-market strategy? Like, what does that mean for like your top of funnel marketing components of it? Does that change the way your outreach is? So that you're getting these types of qualified folks? Because, the whole goal here is you got to get them on the phone, or you have to have a conversation at some point in time. And so the discovery of that things to do, like how do you basically build the top end of that funnel to get to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I was actually just talking with a startup before this that's kind of gone through this process, and they sell to enterprise. They sell to security organizations and enterprise. And what they have done is, now that they know what pull is, they have ruthlessly narrowed their ICP. They say like it is like they have like 5 criteria for at the account level to say it's only this kind of security organization and this kind of organization, and they have these characteristics, these tech tools. Okay, that's the first level. The second level is they must have this project on their to-do list. And so they've totally narrowed their account list. And then when they get someone on a call, the first 5 minutes, they know if this person has this project or not. If not, they just say, great, we'll add you to our nurture so that when this project comes on your to-do list, reach out then. Happy to chat then, but it doesn't seem like this is a fit now. So that they can spend time with people who do have pull.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I'm going to sneeze here in a second. Maybe not. Okay. So, like, what did that do to change their marketing? So I get the ICP part of it, but like, does that, like, maybe connect the dots? Maybe is what I'm missing.
Yeah.
When you basically get the ICP clearer, how does that get to the point where these are the projects that need to be done? Right? Is it just basically saying this size organization are going through some change, and so therefore they're good candidates because this, like, for them to get to the next stage in a kind of an enterprise cybersecurity or whatever it happens to be, they're going to have to do that. You're making some assumptions about like a growth path?
So it's going to be different based on the company. I'll give you just like a very random example of this, which is going to be way out of left field, but I really like the example, which is there's apparently a crisis response consultant who sold to Fortune 500 CEOs when they had an activist investor fight that was public in the news. So, how do you get your account list for that? You open the newspaper, right?
Exactly.
And so that's a great, but how do you get them to talk to you? That's the hard, because anybody can open the newspaper. Yeah. Well, this person apparently, again, the legend goes, they would send a physical samurai sword to the CEO's office, hand delivered with the note of, I will go into battle with you, right? And so the point here is, if you know who is in a situation where they would be weird not to buy your product, where they have pull, they have this priority right now. If you can figure that out, then you just do weird things to that targeted list. If you don't, then sometimes you have to do more spray and pray type outreach, saying, hey, are you going through X right now? And you can make X wildly specific, so that only the kind of person who's going through that right now, who will have pull, will reach out to you. But I prefer the more elegant approach. I call that a toll booth approach. You basically set a toll booth up for that moment when somebody has pull.
Yep, that totally makes sense, right? There's an event, right? Or there's something that's super clear. How does this work with like product market fit, right? You think a lot of companies, especially going from 0 to 1, it's messy in the beginning, right? You're trying to, you think you have this ICP and you're trying to add features to it, and you're trying to get to that point. And so then you have this other component of it where it's like saying, well, the product's in one place, my sales kind of strategy, I can see the projects to be done. There may be a gap in that. How do small startups kind of navigate that kind of maturity curve to get to like product market fit, where then you got more consistency on the projects to be done and the pull framework kind of is more consistent?
Yeah. The unsatisfying answer here is startups you tend to sell to their first 10, 15, 20 customers things that if you squint are fairly similar, and then if you zoom out, they're kind of different. Yep. And then you're going to have, of those, you're going to have like 5 who hate your guts, and you're going to have, 10 that are, kind of fine. And you're going to have people who love the product, who are like your power users. And so, it's messy at the beginning, but everyone seems to go through the same exercise, which is at some point, you're like, okay, it would take a lot of effort for us to make the people who are angry at us and not using the product use it. The people in the middle, I don't know if there's anything in the world I can do to make them happy, like to make them real power users. What's different about the power users than the other people? And that's that they kind of like tend to look at the power users and compare them versus everyone else and say, oh, okay, we thought our ICP was A. It turns out, what if we just focused on like A prime, which is this subset of the world, and they look at it a little bit differently, and they buy really fast. And so it's always this process of kind of like compare and contrast, where you get to like, okay, this is actually the ICP. Let's, all the other people, we'll kind of hope they don't churn, but we're not going to be super pissed if they churn. And we'll just focus on A prime and just go after them and kind of reposition the entire company around that case study.
It creates kind of a narrower funnel, right? You basically have a lot, the quality of the stuff in your funnel should be a much higher conversion rate all the way through. And so is that a difficult thing to like, sales guys, marketing people, SDRs, they're all numbers. people, right? And so I if you can tell them that their conversion rate's going to go up, they're all ears, right? How does that happen? But like, is there a cultural part of this you have to lead, or it's just showing them the example of this is so much easier, and then they're basically saying, okay. And then you have to have the discipline on the calls to say, I'll put you in the nurture. This is not a priority for you right now. And I got to imagine that's a cultural shift once you get this like instituted to getting everybody on board so that they are consistent.
What I find it is like, yeah, any change is a cultural shift. What I find is that a lot of times salespeople have this, and they have this like intuition in the back of their mind where they can't quite articulate it, but they know that a certain kind of person buys in like 10% of the time of everybody else and with 10% of the effort, and they wind up being really happy afterwards. And it's like, and what pull does is once you fill out the pull framework and you kind of like say, here's who we're serving, here's what they're really trying to do, it helps everyone focus on that kind of person, and it makes the intuitions that a lot of salespeople have legible and like targetable. And so once it's like, wait, what if you just sold to the people who bought really fast? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that. Why not do that?
Do you think this mostly works in kind of a more like you have to be talking to somebody? I mean, how does this work in a digital sales environment? I guess is what I'm like really trying to think about. And so, you've got a lot of companies that either use more digital sales and it's an exception to close, or it's totally digital. Does this kind of work in all of those regards?
So some of the digital sales, product-led growth type companies, what I've seen them do is, I'm helping one out now, and they're like early stage where they're not quite sure exactly who their customer is. And so they considered basically two paths. Path one is just let the data answer it, pour a bunch of money in, see what happens, and put a bunch of money into ads and stuff and just see what happens at the outset and like look across a bunch of data. They decided not to do that because like it used to be way easier to raise a lot of money and to spend a lot of money on that. And so they were like, well, I think that I know we're eventually going to be kind of self-serve and we can have that on our website, but right now I want to try to basically sell our low-priced product to people, knowing that I'm not going to do this forever. Yeah. But I'm going to do that for the express purpose of trying to figure this out really fast. And they've done that. They kind of got their first 50, 100 customers that way. And that process has led them to compare, contrast who was successful, who wasn't, why, has led them to really quickly iterate on who has pull, who do they believe they are actually serving, who should be their ICP, and then everything downstream of that. Help them iterate on that way faster because they can tell in a call where otherwise they'd just be looking at the person didn't use the product. Like, What do I do with that? Or they clicked and they didn't convert. Okay, cool. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's just two things that don't scale, right? So they're basically spending time getting a bunch of information to build a digital system that they hope hits the sweet spot of what they're doing. Is there a good example, or do you have an example in your consulting or other stuff that this just didn't really work for them, or like you had to take multiple bites of the apple? We thought it was going to be one thing, it didn't turn out to be. And like what is the impact to something like that?
Yeah, so there's a startup that I don't know if that would probably fine. They went through YC now. They're growing super fast now. But we basically spent a year going down a path to try to sell to customer success leaders for a tool that would help them do integrations faster. They have a lot of people they're trying to onboard. Those people need integrate like certain custom integrations. They have a growing backlog of people who need to onboard. Don't they want to buy this? Don't they have they seem to have a project on their to-do list to do their custom integrations faster. And it just they did, but they didn't. We just couldn't find a way to get the deal velocity to be anywhere near fast enough. They just, we'd get a lot of nods. Oh yeah, this is exactly what we need. And then the deals would just kind of like slow down, kind of no matter what we did. And so in that case, we just kind of figured, oh, it's kind of like it always happens, which is then one person bought really fast and we scratched our head and said, well, what if we did more of that?
Yeah. Oh. Do you think that, like, how does this work in a more traditional enterprise sales, right, where you have a lot of stakeholders? And so is it just like the corporate, you're just stepping it up one level where it's like this is a corporate job to be done and somebody owns it,
Yes.
but there's a bunch of stakeholders in that. That's a lot of what we sold in, at least at the large market, where, it could be a complex sales cycle.
Totally. So yeah, I think of it as basically in an enterprise sale. And again, we're just doing this with like selling security software at very large enterprises. I was just talking to a founder in this space, and the way they think about it is it's basically the same, right? There has to be a single person who has this pull. They have a project that they are personally trying to get done, or somebody else has told them that they must get done, or whatever it is. And they don't have good ways to do that themselves. So our tool can kind of unblock them so that they can do that thing. Now, that person, like, that's a prerequisite, because that person is going to be the champion, and they're going to have to navigate us through the 47 different steps of their purchasing process. And so that person has to have a lot of pull to be willing to do that. But then it's a mistake to think that, okay, cool, we got a champion, now we need to go and convince everybody else in the organization. That's what I tend to see founders do. And so you get on a group demo with 47 people on it, and you try to sell to all of them. And it's like, oh my gosh, that just goes off the rails. The whole premise is this champion is trying to get their project done. They're going to try to sell this internally. We're here to help them do that. So we are, I think of, we're both Bills fans. We think of the tush push, right? And we're not holding the football in that case. We are pushing the champion from behind.
Yep. No, that's a good way to put it. How does this change like the discovery process, right? Everybody goes through discovery, but like, is there a set of like, once you figure out this kind of job to be done, do sales organizations then figure out what discovery really looks like to kind of validate that, or to like really do the discovery to like make sure that it's there?
Yeah, really good question. So discovery in a sales call, there's I think of it as like there's stuff before you've figured out what pull is, and then after you've figured out what pull is.
Yep.
After you've figured out what pull is, you can usually have like one or two killer questions at the very beginning. They're like, what are you trying to do about X or whatever it is? And it would be like quite specific, like, how are you currently doing your security review process, and what do you need to change about that? Based on the response to that question, like this startup can basically disqualify somebody as not having pull in the first call. And so that's what happens after you figured out what pull is. Before you figured out what pull is, I recommend a kind of more generic, kind of more open-ended approach that's actually looking to try to fill out the pull framework, where it's, instead of just asking a long list of discovery questions, tell me about your current process, what are your pain points, like all the typical things you will read online, unfortunately. It's like, what are you trying to do? Where are you stuck? What have you tried? Why aren't your options good enough? Why aren't your current methods good enough? That's roughly what you do to fill out the pull framework for those people. And that really helps make legible to you what is their pull, if any, and therefore what should I pitch?
And is it like for people that are traditional discovery, like that transition from doing, the broad list of things to get to pain points and that sort of stuff to moving to this, is it awkward for sales guys to go do, or like, is it just take practice? I imagine it's just like anything else. It's going to some change management.
Totally. So I mostly help founders on this.
Okay.
And they will, by the time they're hiring salespeople, they will have a list of questions that if we ask these questions, like they'll teach the pull framework, and here's what we're looking for, here's what it looks like on a call, and here's the questions to get to this and how to disqualify someone. So it's actually, after you've found pull, it's closer to a traditional discovery process, but just with slightly different questions. The questions are going to take like a slightly different slant, but a sales rep can look at them and say, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Those are clever. And then before is when it's hard. That's when it's hard, and especially for founders who either come from a sales background or have no sales experience at all, because it's highly counterintuitive to be asking questions about this person's to-do list and to even say, like, why aren't your existing options good enough? I mean, you help me understand that. Like, I don't know. You feel like you're basically trying to convince them to buy something else or do it themselves or whatever in there, because you really want to know if there's pull there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's got elements of the challenger sale type of model in that too. Yeah. That's interesting. I noticed in your newsletter, you recently offered to, or I think you did with maybe one of your folks, to review the sales calls, right? And so I think you put it out there in public. I haven't gotten a chance to look at them, but like I'm sure that's a good exercise. And so as you start to look at those, what are some of the things you're looking for? Is it really the criteria? Is it the management of the deal? Like, I mean, talk to me about like some of the evaluation of those sales calls and kind of the information that you can help glean so they continue to get better.
Yeah, I find sales calls are the best asset for learning about a startup that exists. I think they're just so useful because you get to hear a customer say words, then the founder say words, and the customer react to those words in screens. And like, you kind of, everything about a startup can come together or come apart in a sales call. And so I mostly focus on sales calls from the kind of product market fit perspective of like, how do we figure out what we are pitching such that the person we're pitching to will rip the thing out of our hands, kind of despite how good we are at sales or how together the product is. That's what the early stage I find is like all about. And so what I'm looking for in a sales call operates at a couple of levels. The most important thing I'm looking for is, does this potential customer have pull? And if so, what is their pull framework? And so I'm looking for, that monologue at the beginning of a sales call where they, talk for like 3 minutes about their team, their cat, their like 40 other things. If you use the pull framework to analyze that part, what you'll see is that they will often talk about pain points in one category, but then buried in there, they'll have a project that's kind of different. And if we understand what that project is, then we can say, oh, wait a second. They're actually trying to do this thing. What should we be pitching given that this is what they are trying to do? And so we start with the first layer, which is, what is the customer's pull on this call? And is it real or not? Then the next layer is, okay, if that's their pull, what do they want to hear and see? And did we do that? And then finally is, how are they reacting to what we pitch? And then what are the kind of sales, the kind of bread and butter sales tactics that should happen downstream? Do they actually pull and try to buy? Do we push and have to convince them to get on to a next call? Do they ask a series of questions that indicate that they have no idea what we've been talking about the entire time? Like, there's all this kind of stuff that you can do, but the most important are the upstream. What is their pull, and what did they want?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. With Gong and some of these other tools now, I mean, do you feel like you could build kind of some of the AI almost coaching to basically evaluate these almost in real time for sales reps, right? Where you basically build the framework of the pull, and then every time they do it, they're basically getting an evaluation. Here's what you could do better, or here's some information. Like, that kind of iterative basis to remind you of the basics and then the nuances of it seem like that'd be really helpful. And really taking some of the ideas and practices you're talking about here and making it, and then the nuance for the individual, right? Here's what you do well in this framework, and here's what you don't, which is what you're probably doing today in your consulting, but it's basically trying to abstract it so that you can scale a little bit, I suppose.
Totally. Yeah, I have a Claude skill that is got hundreds now of uses from different startups, which I'm going to be releasing more publicly on. And yeah, I think the benefit. So what I tend to see in these like AI coaching, AI skills things is that they're often quite probabilistic of like, well, we've analyzed 30,000 sales calls, and it turns out when the seller does X, Y, Z, the buyer has a X% more chance of buying. And so here's the best practices here. And that's fine. That's useful from like a tactical perspective. What I've found is that the pull framework is kind of a deterministic thing of like, here, if they have this project on their to-do list that is actually unavoidable and the list of options have limitations that are available to them, they would be weird not to buy something that fits that. And that thing that fits has a very specific way to describe it that is determined by the pull framework. And if we say more than that, it's going to convince them not to buy it. And if we show more than that, it's going to convince them not to buy it. And so I've been I really like the pull. It kind of an interesting evolution here that it's almost a like deterministic way to assess a sales call.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. That's pretty interesting. So, like, let's go back to the individual that's listening to this that maybe is in that early stage. They're trying to get their first 25 customers in a B2B type of environment. Where do they start? I mean, how do they? Is it just a matter of first evaluating the pull philosophy and then basically, probably fine tuning more of their ICP? And starting to practice some of this? Like, give me some advice for those folks, because I think that's where they're at, right? They're just saying, this sounds interesting. I'd love to get better at doing this. Now, how do I apply it?
So the easiest way to apply it is to fill out a pull framework. It's just, you can find it online. You can find it on my blog. You can find it anywhere. You can just write PULL out and fill it out yourself. And what that's going to do, especially if you already have customers, what you want to do is you want to look at the ones who kind of bought weirdly fast, or the ones who are really happy, and compare and contrast them and say, okay, what were they actually trying to do? Maybe go back and watch the call recordings and listen for what were they trying to do versus what pain points did they talk about, what problems did they talk about, and what options did they consider? Why did they buy weirdly fast? And what you come out of that with is what I call a pull hypothesis. It's basically a hypothesis that if I talk to a person with these characteristics, not that they might buy, they would be weird not to buy. And so that comes up with a hypothesis. And your job then is to go and test that hypothesis by talking to people who you think look like that. If they don't buy, it's weird. So you have to go back and figure out, was it something wrong with your hypothesis, wrong with this person? Like, what's going on here? And so it's a very simple thing. Write the pull hypothesis, test it, and I tend to do sets of 5 calls to test it. I don't know why. It's just a good number. Do sets of 5, compare, and say, okay, what did we learn? Let's iterate the pull hypothesis. Let's try again.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to start and get some reps at it, and I'm sure you'll learn something as you go through it and see what the deltas are. Maybe in closing, maybe just talk a little bit about your book that's coming out. I know that you've done a lot of work and research and iterations on this, and now it's coming out in a book pretty soon.
Yeah. So it comes out in July, and the book is I've rewritten it 8 times from scratch. It's my current working hypothesis. Like I'm dedicating a lot of my time to figuring this out. And I'd say it's the current working hypothesis is the best that I have to offer, all in kind of one book-shaped format. And there may be future books, future revisions to it. What it will do is it will help you understand what pull is, what it looks like, how it works, how to find it, how to sell to it, and how to think about your startup in the context of pull, with the ultimate goal of making it a lot simpler. It feels like there's a million things we need to be doing while we're failing at like almost all of them. Yeah. Pull framework, you'll still feel like you're failing at everything, but there will be fewer things to focus on.
That's good. Yeah, that's awesome. And so you can pre-order it now, and it comes out early July. I can't remember for the 7th or something. I can't remember what the date is.
July 7th. Yep.
Yeah, okay. There you go. Well, Rob, this has been good. I appreciate you. I've admired your writing. I admire you going deep on this, and it's cool to listen to all the different examples and scenarios. And this is a problem that every startup's got, right? I mean, I think you always, at least from our perspective, people get pretty easy on the product. They figured that out relatively quickly. It's the go-to-market thing that basically stops them from growing and really having a sustainable business. And so this is a great tool to really start to get a framework of thinking about it with some discipline early on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences and the stories of startups that you've really helped. So thanks for taking the time today.
Totally. Thank you, Todd.
Thanks for listening to Startup Stories from the Treehouse. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you found our conversation helpful, leave a review. It really helps other founders discover our show. For more insight and episode summaries, don't forget to subscribe to the Wildfire Labs Substack. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more stories with you next time.